They thought it was over, that we were scattered, broken, done. They were wrong. The galaxy hasn't seen fury until it's seen Earth remember who it is. This is part 1 of Terran Tales, When Earth Broke the Galaxy. Before we light the next fuse, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and drop your theories below. The stars are watching, so are we. They never saw us coming. In all the wilderness of stars, humans were easy to ignore, so full of noise, longing, and contradiction. We weren't hidden by design, we simply didn't matter. Threads of our existence hung on the frayed edge of the galaxy's ancient tapestry. Defiant, messy, uninvited. To the old civilizations, we were background static, lost amid monumental histories. Earth, blue, unruly, brimming with dreams, was a footnote, a curiosity winked at in the starlit archives of the Alliance, unworthy of real attention, the word primitive, stamped upon us in languages that dripped with polished condescension. Our signals, our wars, our symphonies of heartbreak, these they catalogued with affectionate superiority, as one might a spark leaping from wet tinder. A moment's fascination, then forgotten. Yet that spark, beneath the world's feet and within our boundless clamor, refused to die. It became a fire. No one expected what followed, not even us. On the farthest edge of the swirling galactic spiral, where most maps trail into mystery, there is a silence so wide and deep it might as well be the end of creation. Out there, loneliness is not a sensation, it's the background radiation of reality itself. And in that silence spins a blue world, reckless and invisible, both more fragile and more stubborn than any of its inhabitants could ever know. Earth. To the great and time-worn empires of that sprawling galaxy, Earth means almost nothing. It is a speck on their ancient star maps, and even that is generous. Most surveyors never labeled it at all, trusting their instruments to brush it aside as an anomaly of life, swirling around a minor sun. No galactic beacon, no warning buoys, no careful notes in the soft gold glyphs of diplomatic briefings. Primitive is etched into the Alliance's archives, not as a judgment, but as automatic as a yawn. Earth is background noise to a concert older than written history. But what does it mean to be forgotten? On Earth, it meant simply living. On restless nights, before the stars belonged to satellites and telescopes, mathematicians puzzled over the heavens, children imagined monsters and gods in the sky, and poets wrote secrets to distant lights, never expecting any reply. It meant building cities that sparkled like circuitry along the black curve of continents, each light a shout against darkness. I am here. We are here. We lived out loud, our lives chaotic and brief, sometimes cruel, often beautiful. We argued about everything, what to eat, what to believe, what was worth dying for. In glass towers and dusty roads, in war and in tenderness, the human story unspooled in ways so tangled that even we could not parse the pattern. But pattern there was. Always, beneath the... From the vantage point of a far-off observer, Earth is a ceaseless storm. Electromagnetic flares, radio bursts, gigabytes of infighting and invention sent screaming into the void. Most signals fade into nothing, scattered by ionosphere and distance. But some wild ones, ride the cosmic wind for centuries, brief and immortal, arriving as echoes or riddles in the sensors of patient alien minds. The Alliance, for all its wisdom, treats these erratic signals as little more than curiosities, anomalies in the steady hum of the cosmos. They watch us with bemused detachment. Ancient historians, their flesh or crystal or polymer bodies shrouded in regal robes, gather in grand halls of logic and light to observe the latest episode of human folly. They point at the strange staccato violence of our wars, the unpredictable spikes of our hope. Their laughter is kind, sometimes even fond, as one might regard the antics of distant children. Yet from our side of the stars there is no sense of this witnessing, no hint that our noise is heard by anyone at all. We write our galactic story in secret, with no audience but ourselves. To be forgotten by the gray and powerful is to be free, free to fail, to love with abandon, to break, and to begin again. Pain and perseverance ferment in obscurity. Empires argue over meaning, and the satellites continue their slow whirling waltz. Look down from orbit and you will see the wounds and triumphs mapped in light and darkness. The dayside is alive, oceans churned by ancient winds, continents throbbing with restless cities, mountains that remember the bones of long-dead gods. At night, Earth glows, stitched together with tiny fires, sodium street lamps, fishing boats bobbing under the aurora, sprawling highways pulsing with 1,000 stories. If you zoom in, the patchwork is endless. Each lit window is a breath, a quarrel, a promise made or broken. In the background, the world keeps spinning. The thin blue haze of our atmosphere rises and falls, breathing in meteors, breathing out the long memory of every forest and furnace. Weather churns. Empires rise and collapse. Children are born, and the universe remains silent, except for the faint hum of human music, drifting, waiting for meaning. We don't know we're being seen, so we aren't performing. That is the strange gift of being truly forgotten. What happens next comes honestly, defiantly, unashamed. Here, on the neglected spin of a blue planet, ambition festers, and kindness stubbornly seeds itself among the cracks of concrete and old wounds. Scientists tap at keyboards in patched laboratories, dreaming of Mars and Mercury. Lovers write poetry to each other, and sometimes to the stars. Soldiers keep watch along fractured borders, half afraid of their neighbors. From a great height, all of that matters little. Earth is nearly invisible, just one more jewel in a star-splattered ocean, barely interesting to most who measure their lifespan in centuries and their territories in parsecs. And yet, what spark burns there? What combination of chaos and yearning will one day change the order of everything? Those who watched us missed the point. In their certainty and slow wisdom, they dismiss our world as a sideshow, a distraction. But in that cauldron of forgotten striving, a fire is growing, a fire that will one day refuse to be ignored. Earth is not silent, even in the void. We are not stilled, not by disregard, not by distance. The wild ones of Saul are forging themselves in darkness, and all it takes is one overlooked ember, one undignified rebel spark to set the galaxy ablaze. Across the cold sweep of the stars, in a place where night was chased away by the relentless gleam of engineered daylight, the Galactic Alliance gathered in the most ancient of its halls. It was a palace built atop millennia, every corner murmuring secrets of peace born from wars too old to matter. Here, in the great capital, untouched by the petty erosions of time, everything reinforced the myth that rule and reason were eternal, and that order had finally domesticated the wildness of the universe. The Alliance's council chamber was more cathedral than senate. Its vaulted arches soared overhead, made of stones harvested from 1,000 worlds, each swirling with impossible colors. Amber from storm-ravaged Aegir, jet-black obsidian from the magma rivers of Chrysel. The floor itself was a tapestry and polished inlay, an infinite spiral depicting Alliance victories, always spiraling inward toward a single glowing point: assimilation, unity, civilization. Suspended above the chamber glided translucent banners, proud with the sigils of every constituent species, veined blue-black for the crystalline ruin, vermilion and sunburst for the amphibian Valari, a tangled bifurcation of lines and nodes representing the Tessari, more algorithm than art. Light drifted down not from crude bulbs but from living orbs, bioluminescent creatures drifting in glass, their slow pulsing synchronized to the heartbeat of the building itself. Here, in this sanctum, gathered the leaders and dreamers, the eldest and cleverest of 1,000 societies. The room was an aria of contrasts. furred and feathered thinkers from the arboreal homeworlds, bodies folded respectfully in old tradition, insectile administrators flexing their armored limbs in slow deference, even beings of light refracting the council's hush through the multifaceted shine of their bodies. Every robe was a history, every ornament a badge of evolutionary triumph. If you had entered as an outsider, you might have been awed or afraid, awash in the scent of ozone and alien incense, listening to the soft purr and click of languages layered one over another. But the council spoke in a common tongue, but around every word curled centuries of etiquette and expectation. Silence could mean anything, deference, calculation, or simply the weight of old wounds learned and never wholly healed. It was here, in this lattice of ceremony and subtlety, that the fate of half the galaxy could turn on a pause, a glance, or the color a diplomat chose to flash on their skin. For these were the survivors, the adaptable and patient, schooled in the slow victories that come from never giving offense and always remembering old debts. The Alliance prided itself on never acting without consensus. Its strength was deliberation, its might the power of never being rushed. When matters of grave significance unsettled the order of the day, envoys floated up or down on gentle anti-grav stages. Their robes rippled, their translators layered meaning upon meaning as every word was tested against centuries of treaties and memories. Protocol here was so dense it could suffocate a lesser being. On this particular cycle, urgent light pulsed across the base of the chamber, a sign for all to draw near. The subject, matters of threat and security, yet the room did not thrum with fear. Instead, there was a practiced calm, a certainty that, as always, deliberation and dignity would prevail. Into the echoing hall drifted current news from the outer systems, disturbances perhaps among the border colonies. Holographic data orbs spun slow, projecting abstract threats, disrupted trade, uprisings, a flicker of unknown signals edging in from the Beshtari sector. Elegant lines traced the edges of inhabited space, always giving the Sol system a wide, uninterested berth. Upon the maps, Earth and its kin were tiny comets, labeled in polite insignificance, flashing non-significant in gold above pale blue. Delegates took their turns, each word weighted, each gesture full of historic gravity. The amphibian Valari ambassador slid forward, skin alive with shifting patterns, and in tones like slow bells inquired whether these outer disturbances merited more than monitoring. The Ruan, ever crystalline and precise, pointed out that the galaxy's wild places often resolved themselves. Why look to the untamed Sol system or its rowdy offspring? Their technologies were centuries or more behind. Any risk they posed was to themselves. Around the chamber, barely concealed smiles and polite waves of boredom signaled that, yet again, the wild ones of Sol would be an afterthought at best. The Alliance's view of time moves in centuries. They wonder at the fuss of beings who burn brief and loud, who never seem to understand that patience is power. Beneath these sharp silences, a gentle arrogance festered. The Alliance had tamed countless warring species, had shepherded 1,000 races from barbaric histories to gentle, endless stability. This security bred a kind of pride, a certainty that their way, cautious, deliberate, endlessly diplomatic, was the only shield civilization would ever need. The rare mention of humans, then, was almost a joke, an oddity tucked into ancient academic records, an energy spike in an ancient data stream, a case study for students of unpredictability. Their violence was primitive, their passion was childish. Their brief lives could not possibly shape events on a galactic timescale, and so their planet, twining around a minor yellow sun, carried no weight at all in the minds of the Council. But as the reports gathered, staccato, uncertain, flickering from the dark edge of civilization, a new phrase crept into the conversation, spoken at first with amusement and later with the faintest trace of unease. The Vrocht move, a shadow at the edge of mapped space. Something not of patience or policy, but of cold arithmetic and predatory logic. And when the projection screens flickered to life to show alien metal moving with pitiless intention, when the room darkened with a ripple of collective worry, there was still a certainty that protocol and history, not impetuous action, would shield them again. No one, not even the eldest among them, wondered what the strange, boisterous rabble on primitive Earth might do in such an hour. No one imagined, even for a breath, that the fate of everything old and wise might yet depend on the spark they had all so long dismissed. No civilization, no matter how ancient or assured, remains untouched by the darkness between the stars. While the Galactic Alliance held debate after careful debate in their crystalline sanctuaries, while their soft arrogance fermented in the safety of long peace, a new threat pressed close. One with no interest in politics or patience. Out in the border systems there was a hush. Not the hush of respect, or even fear, but the emptiness left by annihilation. Subsidized. That was how the Vract announced themselves, not with words or warnings or even defiance, but with absence. Worlds would vanish, signals would fall silent. N, 9. N, 9. The Vract were born of silence, shaped from cold metal and hungers that had long since outgrown origin myths or stories of progress. They didn't come with banners or elegies or the missives of conquerors. They arrived like a hurricane comes to the sea, indifferently, irresistibly, and with no hatred at all. The Alliance, at first, responded as they always did, sending envoys, dispatching codes of honor, drafting proposals wrapped thrice over in tradition. N. Old war rules, old words, an invitation to dialogue, an assumption that negotiation could tame any peril. Their messages spun wild into the void, carrying the finest speech and most unwavering logic, confidant in the power of history to bind crisis to their skies became a curtain of machinery as Vraked drones descended, occluding every sun. On the ground, kinetic warheads rained without warning or remorse. There was no language of surrender, no time for second thoughts, only the shattering sound of civilization ending. And then, in the aftermath, the true violation began. Neural viruses, silent and spectral, slipped through digital veins and rewrote the code of defense webs and minds alike until only agony and emptiness remained. Cityscapes buckled and collapsed. The air itself seemed to mourn, thick with ash and the last wordless terror of those caught beneath the shadow. Those who watched, who survived to relay a message, had nothing left in their eyes but a silent plea. Why us? Why this? But that was the wrong question. The Vraked didn't need a reason. They advanced by algorithm, by compulsion tied to a logic as alien as it was inexorable. The Alliance, for the first time in remembered existence, found their traditions as weightless as dust before a storm. Desperation bloomed on worlds that had forgotten the scent of fear. In the moon city of Hazakor, once a monument to harmonies so delicate they were sung instead of spoken, now tunnels choked with refugees, amphibian, crystalline, mammalian, huddling beneath domes fractured by shrapnel and the reverberation of kinetic strikes. Here, in the hollowed heart of Alliance stability, defense turrets traced burning arc after arc across the dark, but nothing slowed the deluge. Leaders, panicked and shaken, threaded themselves into the last council chambers, activating protocols older than any single being alive. Hazakor's ancient communications array, once an artifact of ceremony and celebration, was repurposed in an instant. Red warning lights flooded its core as a single global distress signal ripped outward in frequencies both old and new. This is Hazakor, to any system, to any species, to any who yet resist. The voice that carried through the void was neither confident nor proud. It was ragged, broken, its syllables stretching across the distance with the aching clarity of a final hope. We request aid. We beg for rescue. We will not survive without it. All the Alliance's dignity, all its layered custom and careful memory, now condensed into a single cry. Help us or witness our destruction. Yet, even as the signal echoed outward, the counselors who remained did not truly believe that someone would answer. It had been too long since they'd known need, too long since desperation was anything other than a lesson in a child's history text. Out in space, the Vraked pressed on, engines like chained thunder, methodologies shifting and reshaping with every resistance met. In the shadow of their war forms, light itself seemed to bend. Cold, ruthless, inexorable, they moved on to the next world, with the smoke of fallen civilizations still drifting in through every message band. Something fundamental changed. The arrogance of eternity cracked, the memory of peace spoiled by the taste of fear. And still, no one spoke the name of Earth, or the wild children of Saul. If hope lingered anywhere, it clung to the fringe, unheard, unimagined by those who had always believed themselves unbreakable. On Earth, the seasons changed as they always had. Clouds dragged their bellies over the continents, storms whipped the oceans, and somewhere, beneath it all, roots pressed deeper through memory-rich soil. For a brief moment, it felt as if the galaxy's commotions, its pleadings, its tragedies, were the business of some distant, unreachable world. Yet in the hush before change, every breath on Earth seemed to wait, expectant, tethered to the unknown. The signal arrived without fanfare, a faint but unmistakable tremor in the backbone of human civilization. Astronomers caught it first, a ghost frequency, like the echo of a cosmic whale song. Then came the linguists, the defense satellites, then a dozen sleep-deprived intelligence analysts who listened a second, third, fourth time. No mistake, this was not a test. It was a transmission from minds beyond Earth's cradle, and it was not the promise of friendship. It was a cry for help, raw and indiscriminate. On every continent, world leaders were roused from beds and strategy rooms. In old capitals and glittering new ones, ministers and secretaries, generals and envoys gathered with bleary eyes around whirring terminals, their faces pale in the erratic heartbeat of emergency alerts. The Terran Accord, a patchwork of agreements and ancient grievances hammered into brittle armistice, came alive not in celebration but in necessity. Its council chamber wasn't much to look at. Old hardwood tables sanded smooth by decades of arguments, battered leather chairs creaking under the weight of hope and cynicism. Flags, frayed, some stained, many faded by sunlight, hung above a digital wall that pulsed with world maps, satellite feeds, and the icon of a burning city many light-years away. It was the image from Kor, the moon city's collapse replayed on silent loop that set the tone. Buildings toppled as kinetic rain split the sky. Alien faces, frozen in terror, ran for cover. The suffering was abstract, yet the dread was intimate, pressing against the skin of every person in the chamber. There was an old tension in the air, like a thunderstorm balancing on the edge of a blade. The council was a gathering of adversaries forced into common cause. Every accent, every wrinkle, every heartbeat in that room bore the echo of conflicts unresolved. Histories of betrayal, grudges both sacred and petty, alliances always just short of trust. Yet as they watched the silent devastation twist across the wall, an ancient inheritance awakened. The knowledge of fighting extinction, not as nations, but as a single battered species. The first to speak was an elder. His hair shone white beneath harsh fluorescence, his eyes tired but sharp, as if he'd seen every war in memory, and survived just enough of peace to feel the ache of its loss. "They didn't ask for us," he said, voice brittle. "This is a general plea. We were never on their minds at all." It was not insult he felt, but a deep, familiar wound, the ache of always being underestimated. From the far end of the table, a woman leaned forward. The scar across her face twisted as she spoke, lending gravity to the steel in her voice. "They need help. We have ships. We decided once that we would stand alone. Maybe now is the hour we prove we belong with the stars, or else vanish unheard." Her challenge rippled through the room, met with uneasy determination. The Secretary of Defense, face lined like parched earth, shook his head. We aren't prepared. Our warships are relics by galactic standards. We barely keep them flying. But fear alone had never deterred humanity. Pride surfaced, sour and stubborn. Around the table, diplomats, soldiers, scientists, and survivors of 1,000 old wounds weighed their future against extinction. At last, silence reclaimed the room. Not the silence of defeat, but of agreement taking root. The Terran Accord, for all its fractures, was unanimous. This would be humanity's moment to answer, not as supplicants, but as equal contenders, in a struggle the galaxy believed they could not survive. Outside, dawn was creeping over glass towers and ruined alleys alike. Across Earth, children slept or blinked at gleaming screens, unknowing that history was being rewritten in real time. Old rivalries and fresher hatreds bent beneath the weight of a higher calling. Perhaps this unity was nothing but a bandage over the wounds of centuries, or perhaps, in that electric stillness, something new was being born. A stubborn hope, an ember never fully extinguished, ready to blaze into the darkness that waited beyond every star. On the spinning world of Earth, news once flowed in tangled rivers, each current racing ahead for scandal or profit or fleeting glory. But when the storm came and the stars outside our sky caught fire, something ancient stirred in the tide of our telling. The broadcasters, so long fractured by ideology, language, rivalry, now sounded for the first time as if they were all a single voice, cracked with fear and awe. They never quite achieved unison, of course. That was never our way. But on this day, humanity's words braided together, strong as cable and sharp as the memories behind every headline. In grimly lit studios from Johannesburg to Sao Paulo, from Tokyo's neon floors to New York's old steel bones, anchors hunched over their desks beneath banners hastily changed to burning red and violet. Eyes wide, every flicker of destruction, every shrieking comm feed from across the stars, ricocheted through 1,000 satellites and poured into living rooms, village markets, trains, and crowded tenement balconies. Confirmed Vract attack, Alliance worlds under siege, unprecedented planetary barrages, losses estimated in the millions. Distress signals received by Earth, analysis ongoing, no official accord statement. Repeat and repeat. Stories blurred into statistics, images into dread. Yet, through this torrent, a different current pulsed, a slow swell of recognition, the shiver of a small blue planet realizing it was not an audience, but, at last, a participant. In the small, cluttered home of a retired engineer in Manila, 3 generations squeezed onto a tattered couch, struck silent not by spectacle, but by the calm endurance in the faces of those off-world correspondents. In Montreal, in a subway car rocked by late-night commuters, a mother clutched her daughter's hand as the news blared overhead, the child's eyes reflecting both the light of destruction and the shadow of possibility. Old rivalries faltered. Neighbors glanced at each other, not with new affection, but a sobering sense of intertwined fate. On a rain-lashed stoop in Glasgow, an ex-soldier wrapped in a faded bomber jacket stared at a grainy screen propped in his lap. He muttered at first, old wounds flaring at the sight of a world at war. But when the broadcaster turned to a field interview, when a woman, her face streaked with ash, looked into the camera and simply declared, "We will not go quietly," something inside him shifted. Around the world, others felt it too. High overhead in the glassy penthouses of Dubai and the shadowed council flats in Lagos, in bars buzzing with fear or emptied by curfew, the news spread through every artery of human civilization. Fragments of video, of wrecked drones slicing through an alien plaza, a medic, human and clearly terrified, patching up a burned amphibian child, battered soldiers screaming coordinates into the storm-charged dark. And the words of commentators, some grasping for hope, some muttering resignation, some just raw, became a nightly or daily incantation, weaving humanity's nerves together in anticipation and dread. On university campuses, the curiosity of science students dissolved. The theorists had a new subject, yes, but now they watched with clenched fists, knowing that their world might soon burn the way the Alliance's worlds burned. In steeples and mosques, at shrines and behind stained glass, hands joined and prayers rose, halting at first, then surging, ancient and new, brittle and passionate. Not all prayers were hopeful, and not all hope was for victory. Some asked only that we not lose ourselves. Yet, through the static, came more than just fear. There was pride, blunt and terrible. In kitchen after kitchen, the joke, never fully lost even in darkness, spread quick and viral. We told them we were ready. They just didn't know what ready looked like. In the enclaves and precincts, beneath towers and among ruins both new and old, something wild and precious kindled. There would be chaos, there would be division, but for one long, shuddering night, humanity watched itself and did not turn away. We watched the stars, we watched ourselves, and for the first time in 1,000 years, unity was not a slogan or a threat. It was a feeling, brittle, reluctant, but real. A storm was rising. We knew, now, that we would not weather it alone. History remembers humanity's wars for their ruin, but rarely for the alchemy of fear into fortitude. In the shadow of the approaching Vrocht storm, Earth's people, so recently fractured by bitterness and old blood, reshaped that legacy in the harshest fire of all: necessity. There was no grand muster, no time for ritual or ancient songs. In the wake of a united vote from battered halls of government, induction orders swept the planet like a second dawn. The Terran Accord, itself little more than a stitched-together flag, called for the able, the adaptable, the ones who could fight or learn or simply endure. Bureaucracies groaned, tripped, and fell into line. Something quickened in the bloodstream of every nation. The old bases, once playgrounds of paranoia or tombs of peacetime optimists, were reborn overnight. At the Equatorial Defense Complex, a place where the sound of insects had once drowned out drills, rail lines brought recruits by the thousands. Some young enough to recall only peace, some so roughened by previous wars that their faces were already maps of loss. They arrived on foot, in convoys, by airlift, by drone taxi. No one asked why they'd come. Everyone understood. They wore what was at hand: worn civilian shoes, heirloom scarves, faded service jackets from wars that had faded into indifference. Military surplus ran short by the second week, so quartermasters improvised, blending the ancient with the new, taping sensor nodes to battered helmets, patching armor with scavenged polymer, wiring comm units with threads cannibalized from discarded smartphones. The first mornings broke clean and brutal. The air smelled of ozone and wet grass, and every field steamed with anticipation and doubt. Drill Sergeant Amari, a name already whispered, then cursed, then finally respected, stood atop a battered crate, her silhouette framed by dawn. She was a scar made flesh, short and whip-lean, her voice riding over the assembled multitudes like thunder crackling along barbed wire. "Sleep is a privilege," she declared on the very first day, eyes scanning those who dared look up. "The Vrocht won't wait for your snooze buttons, nor will I." The training was more than just endurance. It was transfer. They crawled through tangled obstacle courses designed to mimic the wildest reaches of imagined alien worlds: slick mud, broken glass, freezing rain, spinning turbines, and cloud banks of acrid smoke. Instructors barked and cajoled as recruits scrambled, fell, got up, fell again. For every pain, another voice from the ranks made it a joke. Laughter became as essential as water. They learned to fight in every environment. On gone-to-rust cargo ships ringed by razor wire, they drilled forced entry breaches and corridor skirmishes. In old subway tunnels repurposed as zero-G simulators, recruits tumbled, disoriented, flailing to orient themselves, learning that gravity, like mercy, was a luxury not always afforded. Simulacra of the Vrecht, painted drones, hack-built robots with cold lights for eyes, hunted them day and night. To survive meant learning to improvise. Machine logic, Amari growled, was only ever as smart as the last programming patch. Human chaos could not be coded for. The recruits adapted tactics older than satellites. Urban ambushes, decoys, sudden flanking from unexpected angles. The wisdom of 1,000 small wars found purchase in new soil. Sometimes the injuries were real. Medics in battered white worked near the lines, patching bruised limbs, splinting twisted ankles, sharing a steadying word or swig of contraband spirits. To fail a test was not an end, only the start of another drill. Spirits and bodies were battered, but stubbornness outlasted despair. Technology fused with tradition. AI learning bots, once playthings of Silicon Valley hobbyists, became the recruits' most implacable drill masters. Their plastic faces leered and taunted, their lessons cruel but necessary. Survive, and the drone would remember for next time. Lose, and it would remember anyway, becoming sharper, meaner, near predictive. The most gifted instructors became legends, the most dogged misfits, heroes. Before the month was out, recruits had names for themselves and each other. Badgers, owls, sharks, and, above all, the crows. No noble meaning intended at first, just an inside joke, a bitter nod to the way crows scavenge from the ruins and survive by outwitting the expected. Graduation was not celebration. It was a battered march past rows of empty boots, past names already stenciled in the cold metal of remembrance walls. Those who survived earned battered dog tags, a new sense of tribe and the knowledge that, in the crucible of loss, they'd become something altogether new, something perhaps as rare as hope. And so the crows entered history, not as an army forged by victory, but as a people tempered by pain, defiance glimmering in soot-streaked eyes. There is a moment when the old ways break and the new ones seethe up from the fractures, that a people truly becomes something. The world has seen armies gather before, lines of red and blue on muddy fields, divisions in gleaming parades, the nervous, blinking convoys of armored vehicles clattering toward frontiers. But what Earth's orbit became that spring could not be called a parade or even a mobilization. It was creation by desperation, a force willed into being by fear, ingenuity, and the pure, reckless refusal to simply vanish. If you could have stood just above the atmosphere in those fevered weeks, you would have seen more than ships. You would have seen history folding and welding itself together under pressure. Every orbiting platform, every haunted satellite left over from the wild, dreaming last century was scavenged and reborn. Weather platforms, derelict space hotels, even the pride ships of billionaires, lost to dust and myth, were tugged into the grid and torn open by torch and remote manipulator. Steel and ceramic tiles, solar grids patched with polymer, engines fished up from the oceans, they all became part of the flotilla, desperate to leave Earth, to carry fragility and violence into the unknown. Down in the dry docks, workers slept in shifts amongst the clangor of factories, the ozone stink from scorched circuits, the music of 1,000 languages blending into a new and urgent anthem. There was no time for rivalries or boasts. The shipwrights of Mumbai hammered plates next to students from Santiago, nano-welders from Accra, grizzled orbital engineers exiled for the last year's hack worked shoulder to shoulder with kids who had built only skateboards and dreams. No one asked for credentials. All that mattered was speed and the ingenuity each person brought to their post. The patchwork fleet grew, not graceful as the orbital renderings promised, but alive with intent. Assault transports, their hulls still marked by registry numbers from merchant days, bristled with new armor, the paint still uneven where makeshift regiment insignias and scrawled human jokes marked the sides. Old mining ships were gutted, cargo bays lined with acceleration couches, heavy drill arms swapped for railguns and external bays for drones. Civilian liners were repurposed as hospital ships, shielded and wired for medical telemetry, and the kind of haphazard triage only desperation and love can produce. Perhaps the most telling were the hangar decks converted from pleasure cruisers. Ballrooms now turned into strategic command centers, crystal chandeliers stripped so tactical hollow projectors could cluster above battered conference tables, showing not the planned routes of luxury tours, but the shifting arrows of battle and evacuation paths through the unknown. On the ground, families gathered in the dusk to watch launches, the arc fire from mass drivers splitting the night as hull after hull rose on pillars of thunder. Each liftoff carried not only soldiers but the best the Earth could spare. Translators, hackers, engineers, doctors, linguists, and sometimes dreamers who lied about their credentials and only later confessed, fearing rejection more than annihilation. The actual soldiers, the crows and their supporting wings, drilled in rigid, rotating stations, learning the new realities of space ingress. They practiced over and over the art of moving from zero gravity to the heartbreak of planetary re-entry, learning to trust every harness, every neighbor, every emergency routine, even when alarms screamed and hulls vibrated at the edge of structural tolerance. For many, the hardest moment was boarding. Some touched the hull with open palms, marking it with sweat, prayer, or old trembling symbols, crosses, stars, ciphers from lost alphabets. For the young, it was the hush of first adventure. For the seasoned, it was a bitter déjà vu. Another ship, another sky, another gamble that might leave nothing behind to grieve. No launch was ever silent. Below, the world hummed with half-forgotten hymns, staccato shouts, sobbing pleas. There were those who raged, those who doubted, but against even their despair was the overwhelming weight of momentum. For better or worse, the human expeditionary force had become something almost mythic, a legend rising not from the stories we told, but from the actions taken, raw and irregular, in the face of oblivion. And when the last ship cleared the atmosphere and the fleet formed above the sunrises and the storms, there was no applause, just that silence that falls when humanity, for once, decides to stand up and see if it can make a mark on the face of eternity. The Beshtari sector had never been kind to travelers. Its nebulae, sprawling in electric blues and bruised purples, wove their gas arms like waiting traps. Asteroid belts carved erratic highways through the dark, a place for smugglers to vanish or science outposts to fail quietly and without song. In millennia of galactic commerce, the wise took the long way round. Yet now, the battered remains of an alliance battle group drifted at the sector's edge, half their hulls torn, their signals sporadic, surrounded by shimmering motes of salvage and memory. These were not meant to be the defenders. Their ranks included crystal-bodied researchers, clockwork strategists, and veteran pilots of species no human had ever dreamed of. Their shapes were elegant, their ships richer in function and form than any Terran vessel. But elegance offered little against tide and terror. The first vraked wave had come earlier than any projection. It was quiet, no boasts, no lights before the storm. Drone swarms blackened the parsecs ahead. Factory vessels, shaped like knives and tumors, spun up and began carving moons into fuel. The defenders tried what they knew: formation, protocol, the slow chess of attrition. But the vraked did. When the human expeditionary force cracked out of hyperspace, late, disordered, in pulses instead of parades, no one on the Alliance bridge believed what they saw. Terran ships appeared half-finished, armor plates still smoldering from recent welds, engine signatures more like desperate prayers than blueprints. Some jumped in backwards, weapons already firing, as if the very fabric of space couldn't keep their urgency out. Tradition demanded a battle line. Human ships scattered, exploded into a chaos of movement. Small corvettes lurched straight for the asteroid fields, using planetary debris as moving shields. Old mining trawlers, retrofitted with illegal pulse guns, burrowed under void cover and cut power at the last second, only to reappear, igniting with wild salvos in the wracked rear. What made no sense to the models suddenly became the new normal. The wracked, cold logicians advanced with calculated malice. Their weapons, silent, energy-efficient, and mathematically cruel, found targets in Alliance hulls, not expecting the ragged swarm of Terrans to disrupt their grid. It was not choreography, it was a brawl. Human engineers used comms lag and local static to send fake distress calls, pulling entire drone squadrons into kill pockets seeded with floating mines. Small squads of navigators linked their ships by crude cable and rotated their hardpoints as one, outmaneuvering wracked targeting and confusing even the sector's own allies. Again and again, those on the Alliance side gasped or cursed or simply stared, unable to believe anyone would dare so much chaos at the edge of doom. In a moment that would echo through war colleges for centuries, a team of Terran exotechs, 6 in all, patched suits and battered helmets glowing with repurposed friend or foe beacons, launched across the void toward the wracked command ship. They sailed through wracked point defense fire on jets of CO2 and hope, one losing a leg to a lucky pulse, 2 spinning end over end until manual thrusters caught. It was absurd. It made no sense, and yet it worked. They slammed onto the hull with the thunderclap of a desperate people, cut their way through smart alloy and atmosphere. Inside, chaos. Living metal walls morphing whiplash fast to stop them. But among the sparks they found what they'd come for. A neural core, so cold it frosted their gloves. They wired half the charge, set the other half against the timer, and turned the alien's own power against itself. The detonation rippled through space. Wracked drones, synchronizing to their central logic, spasmed and collided, their signals torn and disrupted by a logic pulse they'd never planned for. Some vessels simply died. Others twitched, friendless, now prey. The defenders, Alliance and human, pressed back, driving the machines from the Beshtari line for the first time in living memory. In the silence after battle, orders and explanations ricocheted across every wavelength. Alliance commanders demanded sense. This is the end of Part 1. Watch out for Part 2. Like, subscribe, comment. Tell us what moment gave you chills. Welcome to the fight. Welcome to Terran Tales.